in this Russo-Ukrainian conflict. So Mariupol, it just staggers me it hasn't fallen already. I mean, surely it's a matter of time. Seems like the Ukrainians have not even made strenuous efforts to relieve it. Perhaps they recognize it as a forlorn hope. And that those fighters in Mariupol, realizing that there is no relief, may just make them fight all the more ferociously. And they know what sort of fate awaits them if they capitulate, because presumably they'll just be murdered by the Russian military, as they've killed so many civilians already, knowing them to be civilians, knowing them not to be any threats whatsoever. If they're lucky, they'll be sent to the Gulag for years and years. Already, the United Nations has said that several thousands Ukrainian civilians at least have been abducted, kidnapped, and taken deep into Russia, forced to sign documents saying that they're willingly moving to Siberia and things like that. So it's really just Stalinism all over again. It's just quite staggering. It's just so shocking that Putin has reverted to this, because he wasn't as bad previously. I mean, I know there were some massacres in Chechnya, and the world largely didn't call him out on this. A lot of the worst of it was going on right after 9/11, and if you could present it as being against something like Al Qaeda, a lot of Western countries will say it's all in a good cause, and we have to give him carte blanche. Anyway, I just don't see how Mariupol is going to be saved. And they say that well, Russia's actually said that most of its fighting is going to be in the east. The focus is on Donbass and Luhansk. That's why they withdrew from Kiev. They lost the Battle of Kiev. Shall we be frank about that? The Ukrainians are raiding across the border just a little bit. Those 6 Russian regions neighboring Ukraine have put their terrorist threat level to the highest one. Obviously not terrorism, it's lawful military action by a sovereign state in wartime. I mean, if Russia invades Ukraine, then Ukraine is obviously entitled to use a proactive defensive strategy and go and destroy Russian military assets or anything if we use to the war economy whilst they're waiting for the Russians to attack them. The Ukrainians are very well dug in around Luhansk and Donbass, so it'd be difficult for the Russians to advance. The Russians could try and envelop them. The fighting in the coast is quite important, because that's much more of an area that Ukraine would have to defend. Their defense would be stretched very thin. And the Russians have had the greatest success in southern Ukraine. So the Russians are maybe now going to be reinforcing success rather than reinforcing failure. Towards the end of the First World War, that's the Allies found they had to do, is reinforce success. And if you're failing to advance in an area, you just give up on that one. So I'm surprised that the Ukrainians didn't make more of an effort to regain some land in southern Ukraine. I suppose they regained it in northern Ukraine, and maybe they regarded saving the capital as the priority. It was been a psychological fillip for them that they've managed to do so, be a boost that they could retake Kherson or whatever. And that's why that Russian warship Moskva was hit by a missile. Even the Russians acknowledged there was a fire on board and an ammunition explosion. Now, what caused that? The Russians not saying that it was because it was struck by a Ukrainian missile. They didn't deny it was struck by a Ukrainian missile, they simply didn't mention it. And if there was an ammunition explosion not caused by a Ukrainian missile, then that was obviously gross incompetence of the Russian Navy. So it had to be towed back into port. But because the Ukrainians were pleading for all sorts of armaments, including these anti-ship missiles which could be fired from land. So maybe they're finally getting those, because if the Russians can attack from the sea, then the Ukrainians will be stretched too thin. They can't defend the entire coastline. So we know that mostly going to be fighting in the west, so in the very east of the country. But as I say, I think the advantage is going to shift towards the Russians. They will be able to sort out their logistics a bit better, and because the ground is dry now, a lot of their vehicles will be able to go off the road, will no longer be so stuck. If the Ukrainians have to move out of their defences, their bunkers, their anti-tank trenches and so on, fight more in the open, then they will be more vulnerable. But they have got an awful lot of NATO military armaments. I know Zelensky's demanding more every single day. He's never going to say, oh, that's enough, you can stop it now. I mean, he's always got to be pleading and got to be sounding desperate, because he doesn't want complacency to set into Western countries who stop supplying him with things. So I think that's what's going to happen. Surprised that the big push hasn't come yet already. And I'm again surprised that Putin hasn't gone for weapons of mass destruction, hasn't used them yet. Apparently, so various things like phosphorus have been used, but that's not confirmed. That could be true. There is a rumor that a chemical weapon has been used, but very few people have died from that, if any. So that That claim might be false, which is why the Ukrainians are not making it very vociferously. Okay, so that's what I think is going to occur. I don't see the war being over anytime soon. Um, Remember, just about a week ago, Putin announced the call up of 135,000 men between the ages of 18 and 27, and they're going to serve till the 1st of July. So I think the war is going to go on that long at least. Obviously, their compulsory military service could be extended. Excuse me. You've never seen somebody do that on a YouTube video before. I can say that without fear of contradiction. Right, so the Ukrainians obviously buoyed up by some of their earlier successes. They've had some psychological boosts. Um, More evidence has come to the light, or really irrefragable evidence, of a fairly large-scale massacre at Bucha and at Borodyanka. So yeah, thank you. These dormitory towns of Kiev, just north of Kiev, at least several hundred civilians killed, and quite credible reports of rapes. I mean, sorry to say that rape is probably committed in every war. Doesn't make it right, ever. But this crime is committed mostly by young men. Most soldiers are young men. Not saying that most young men commit that crime, absolutely not. But there are few rapists among any nationality. But the question is, how does the army respond when it's done? Do they discipline these soldiers, or do they just say, oh, that's absolutely fine? And do they let them off scot-free, or do they even encourage them to carry this kind of thing out? I'm not aware that the Russian army ever encourages it. Certainly in the Second World War, they virtually never penalized people for doing it, and that's partly because the Third Reich had committed against Soviet women on a huge scale. So negotiations are hardly ongoing right now. There's little point in talking when such huge-scale atrocities have been committed. Now, people talk about attrition wearing down Russia, there's such high casualties, but they're also wearing down the Ukrainians. I think the Ukrainian fighting spirit is clearly greater, but public opinion, well, in Russia, the public is not allowed an opinion, but it's to a great extent is shaped by the media, which is entirely state-controlled, either directly or indirectly, stringent citizenship. Is more difficult to negotiate now, as President Biden has branded Putin a war criminal, which he definitely is, has said that genocide has been committed. Now, has it been committed? I mean, certainly several hundred civilians have been deliberately killed, taking them out, shooting them, knowing them to be civilians, that they were not armed at any point, tying them up before killing them. They were no threat, and deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure time and time and time again. Does that mean it's tantamount to genocide? I suppose it does. I don't want to kill all Ukrainian civilians, but want to kill even a significant segment of the Ukrainian civilian population as that. Certainly, Putin aims at the erasure of Ukraine as a nation, just to deracinate them, to deprive them of their identity, certainly against the Ukrainian language and so forth. And Russia's losing regional influence and wants to be the hegemon. Azerbaijan and Armenia notably negotiated recently in Brussels under the auspices of the European Union. Not that they're European Union members, but the President of the European Commission, Charles Michel, brought them together, and the EU is trying to broker a long-term peace deal between them. And Russia usually say, hey, this is our patch, back off. Nobody else can have any sway in the erstwhile Soviet Union. Armenia, which is economically little more than an adjunct of Russia. Thank you for watching my channel. Please donate. Toodaloo.